Hey, welcome everyone back to the Dusty Wheel. You've joined us for our live call-in talk show all about the Wheel of Time, and I do like to say that maybe other fantasy series later in 2020, but today is all Wheel of Time. And not only just Wheel of Time, today is our special live theory discussion, and I picked Padan Fain and Mordeth because I love Padan Fain and Mordeth. I think it's a fantastic character. So we're going to go deep on this. But before we do that, I do want to note there's been a ton of Wheel of Time news that's come out this last week. Next week is going to be that episode where we do a recap of everything that's happened ever since January. We're going to have WOT up on the panel with us. It's going to be a lot of fun. If you haven't checked out his channel on YouTube, do that. Go subscribe. He does a great job of covering the news. But we're going to have him. We can't wait to have him in with us. But that being said, I didn't want to cover too much of the news. I think you saw Jennifer Garcia. Everyone was wondering. She was cast as Lyanna, Keeper of the Chronicles. That's really exciting, and she seems really cool. She's with the fans, at least on Twitter and Instagram, kind of teasing us and such. And so I thought that was a lot of fun. Everyone's been having a lot of fun with Twitter of Time lately and Instagram on the cast and production and the fans themselves. So next week we'll cover all of that. But tonight we're talking Padan Fain, Mordeth, and the evil that drives them. And what we'll do is we'll dig in with some Wheel of Time metaphysics right at the beginning. But before I do that, I want to bring in my distinguished panelist. Welcome to the three of you. Thanks for showing up on a Wednesday night to talk the Wheel of Time.
Hey.
Hi, everyone.
Right at the top, we got Linda Taglieri. Linda, thanks for being our special guest tonight. Linda is, what I want to say, she is probably the only Wheel of Time scholar, at least the only person I would give Wheel of Time scholar status to. She runs 13th Depository. If you haven't read her stuff, she knows the books inside and out. I like to think that I have a lot of in-world knowledge, but she likes to extend it back out and tell me exactly where Jordan got inspiration from, and that's why I love what you bring to the table, Linda. Thanks for being here. And then, of course, we have the ever wonderful Tal and Todd. Thank you both for showing up, my good buddies from Theoryland days. Can't wait to hear what you're going to say about Padan Fain and Mordeth tonight. So, okay, we're here. Let's get started. This is an important kind of formative 3 quotes from Jordan. I think all of them are from him about the Wheel of Time. In order to understand Padan Fain and Mordeth, we have to understand some key pieces of the Wheel of Time, just the basics. Well, these are deeper than the basics, but let's go there. So our first fact, that Robert Jordan was once asked a question about Rand and Ishamael fighting over Falme in the sky. And the person was wondering if it was something done by the One Power or something done by the Creator. Like, how did they appear in the sky? Robert Jordan said, an effect of the wheel, really, it wasn't the Creator. The wheel is more than a simple mechanism. Remember, the wheel can spit out Taverin, can spit out heroes as a self-correcting device because the pattern is drifting from what it is supposed to be. We're not talking about something as simple as a spinning wheel at all. We're talking something more along the lines of the most complex computer you could possibly imagine. So I think that's, as far as kind of factual, I think that's an important piece. I don't think we all kind of narrow in on that. The wheel as a super AI is like how I like to think about it. Linda, do you think about the wheel that way as far as the most complex computer imaginable? Like, why would Jordan call it that?
Yeah, I do think of it that way.
Why? I mean, what does that mean to you? Because we also learned that it's not sentient. So how do you get the most complex computer AI, in essence, that's not sentient? Is there like an edge there? What is he trying to say by it's not sentient?
Yeah, that seems to be conflicting, but then AI in computers, are they sentient? So I guess that is actually a really good metaphor for the wheel. So it means that it can detect when the pattern has drifted from what it's supposed to be, and it has various negative feedback loop, I guess, is what it's set up to do, to actually correct that.
Yeah, it's the most advanced that you could even imagine, which I think is really important. That whole what it's supposed to be. We have to remember that the wheel has a target of what it's supposed to be. A blueprint. I think that's a great way to think about it. Let's go to the second kind of piece of this that kind of helps us form our understanding of the kind of Wheel of Time foundations. So he was also asked, in the Wheel of Time, there's a focus on events occurring again and again throughout history. Is it just history, which is circular, or is it time itself, which is in a loop? Robert Jordan replied, if you think of history being in a loop, then time must be in a loop. Whatever I change now, whatever injustices I correct, the wheel will inevitably return. The inequities will return. There is no possibility for change. Therefore, there is not impetus to change. So time and history are in a loop in this world, a large enough loop. It's really quite immense. And the question said, so the sun will never go nova, will never die? And Robert Jordan said, in this universe, no. So this is another important piece. People forget this. Not only is time circular in this way, there is this notion of a reset. There isn't this linear, this universe. We have almost encapsulated. You almost might be able to say it's Matrix-like, as in the Matrix, when it comes to this most advanced computer in circular time, built off of 7 ages, and with this pattern, that blueprint that has been given. So it's an important kind of awareness of what the wheel is and how it functions, to know that we have repetitive cycles of time going on here. And there's one last piece to this that I want to bring up. So Matt Peck asked, and he paraphrased this, he said, as the wheel turned each time an age rolls around, is the pattern exactly the same each time, or does it change? Robert Jordan answered, he seemed to like this question, or sorry, this is a paraphrase. He likened it to a tapestry which, seen from a distance, each third age, to make it easy to track, has exactly the same pattern as the previous third age. However, when seen up close, there are differences. Threads are different nations exist, geography is different personalities to rise to prominence. These changes, while minute in the grand scale of the pattern, affect the pattern enough so that while 2 iterations of an age are almost the same, the first third age may be wildly different from the 100th third age. So this is an important piece. This kind of comes back to that whole notion of a little bit of agency, a little bit of freedom to change. It sounds like the blueprint doesn't have to stay the same, but it does have to stay balanced. I mean, how do you understand that, Tal, when it comes to, we have a blueprint here, but the pattern or the wheel allows for there to be change, and the one versus the 100th version of the third age may be wildly different. What's important about each of these facts, at least to you, when you think about, the wheel of time and the pattern and how things are woven together?
I think for me, and I don't know if I'm conflating it with other theories, but the concept of free will comes into play in terms of individual free will as it plays into the greater pattern. So the pattern is a loop, certainly time is a loop, but individual choices and the free will that predicates those choices are going to create small ripples that will then create bigger shifts in the pattern that could create a tonal or structural shift to an age. And I think that I might be biased only because of the part of the age that we saw. It was quite clear that people's individual free will and their choices. Rand had choices every second of every day. He had a choice at Dumais Wells. He had a choice on Dragon Mount. He made a choice with Elena, Vienda, and Min. He made a choice on the slopes of Shaiol Ghul. Those small choices had impact, and he was a great example of it. But I do feel like other small, like Else Grinwell, for example, up and left, and so her choices were by obviously influenced by the concept of a Ta'veren influence, but those choices had impact.
Yeah, I think that you bring up a good...
Does that answer the question?
Yeah. No, that's a really important piece to this, because, right, you can get stuck in this idea that there's this circle and just repeats over and over again. But the way that the creator set up the wheel, it allows for a lot of variation, right? It allows for this age lace to change in its complexion, as long as it has a balance. So I think that that's key. So I wanted to cover those 3 pieces because it's key to our understanding of why Padan Fain, why Mordeth, and why this character is so interesting and compelling, at least to me. So let's jump into some nitty gritty about Mordeth, knowing where he came from. Let's cover the first kind of Mordeth fact here. This happens to be something that I asked Brandon. I asked him who Mordeth was as far as before he shows up in Eredal and becomes the counselor to the king. And because Brandon had said some things about Mordeth, like that he had gone in search of power before this. So Brandon said, about Mordeth. Yeah, he wanted to defeat the Dark One, and he felt that he could find other ways to do it. He originally was good. He wasn't this terrible person to begin with, but he was looking to defeat the Dark One and to find a way to defeat the Shadow in particular. And he looked into a lot of things he shouldn't have looked into. There are evils that are not necessarily directly related to the Dark One, though everything evil kind of has, well, just as there are goods that are not related necessarily to the one power, we're talking much as Perrin runs with wolves. This is a thing older than, well, there are other evils that are old in a similar way. He found many things of darkness, and there is one in specific that is driving him, but he knew too much. He found things he should not have gotten into, and that is what turned him into, or when he got there, that he was already corrupt. He still thought he was doing a good work. He still thought we were going to raise this kingdom up, and it was going to become this bastion against the Shadow, but by then he was already corrupted. And I asked him, is this same corrupting influence what corrupts everyone through the dagger itself? And he said, yes. Through him, yes, and even through his presence. So, this concept of who Mordeth was, right? It almost has shades of, Indiana Jones, if you will, mixed with Agenor. It's like Agenor mixed with Indiana Jones is like Mordeth, right? This guy that wasn't afraid to kind of cross, the boundaries of what was okay. He went in looking for things related to the Shadow and found other evil powers. And then one of those corrupts him, which I think is an important piece to this. Todd, were you aware of this particular quote? And if not, does that change how you kind of view what Padan Fain becomes?
No, I was aware of this. I always took it more along the lines of Mordeth was trying to defeat the Shadow without the dragon. Go about it his own way. I think somewhere in there it says that he did visit the Finns, and I think that's something that maybe he was looking for a way to not have to wait on the dragon to be able to defeat the Dark One.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I saw a theory out there where someone actually asked Jordan, basically, if Mordeth was, or the evil that corrupted him, was somehow a prior failed, dragon soul or something. I don't know. It was an interesting theory. I was like, I could have fun with that. So let's go on to the second piece of Mordeth here. I asked him, is Mordeth's power, this evil power, comparable to the one power and true power? Is it a power that can be woven? And Brandon said, no, it's more something along the lines of Perrin's wolf power, something more natural. You couldn't weave Mordeth. It's more of a natural, though it's unnatural. It's an unnatural, natural thing. Let's say it's more instinctual, all right? Which I love that. I think of that when he says unnatural, natural, I think of almost supernatural, if you will, a supernatural kind of evil. And then Jordan said back there in the previous one that it was man-made, which I think is an important notion. And then there's a question about how about Padan Fain and his talents. And Alan Romanchuk, the editorial assistant to Robert Jordan, said he acquired his talents when he merged with Mordeth, who, paraphrasing a little bit, got his power from research and sucked the souls from his victims. So I think those two pieces, right? It's a man-made evil. It has supernatural characteristics. And Brandon kind of tied it into something instinctual, something... but he tied it into Perrin's power or talents, which when it comes to the wheel, is this your understanding, Linda, is this evil or this power part of the wheel? In other words, is it just like a talent, if you will, a power that like the wolf power?
Well, because it's man-made originally, then it was definitely part of the wheel. I think that where Mordeth went wrong, literally, as in wrongness, was in being completely unscrupulous as to what he was prepared to do to beat the Shadow, like outshadow the Shadow. This is where he went to such an extreme that he went beyond, I guess. And that's perhaps what Brandon's trying to convey, that it started out as quite human, but it just got out of control, like maybe a positive feedback loop instead of a negative one.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is because, like you said, it's man-made, but it has natural unnatural components to it. If you think about it, at least when I think of Agenor, right? I think of his genetic research that he did. He was mixing natural and unnatural things, right? And so that's why I love that Brandon and Jordan kind of tied this in, this evil power. I mean, look at what Agenor created, and it does make you wonder, and we'll talk about this later, but it does make you wonder if Agenor was the same kind of person. In other words, he clearly was going and looking for things that he could use as stock for his creations. And it makes you wonder if he ever ran into this particular one himself. But we'll cover that in a little bit. Our next piece on Mordeth here, in the Eye of the World, Therese asked, in the Eye of the World, chapter 19, is Mordeth's body an illusion? Does this foreshadow Fain's power in Winter's Heart and Towers of Midnight? Brandon said Mordeth's body is more than an illusion, but you could say it's less than real. I love Brandon's answers to this stuff. Less than real, more than an illusion. Okay, Tal, interpret that for me.
Yeah, I can't. I have a real problem with these wishy-washy responses on Fain.
So, but think about that. Is a Myrddraal less than real but more than an illusion? And what do you mean by that?
No, a Myrddraal is flesh and blood and real.
But the way that it moves, right? It can ride the shadows, if you will, right? It's
sure, but that's it's not a metaphysical skill. It is a physical skill derived of genetics.
Yes, and that's why I guess my point here is maybe the root of this. There's some kind of metaphysical, nature to this. So this is the word that comes to mind. Ghost, right? It's not an illusion. In other words, it's not just like a power of some sort, but it's not real, tangible like that. It has more incorporeal, characteristics. It's matters of a different nature, I guess, than something.
I know two brothers from Kansas who would disagree with you. But notwithstanding that answer. But
the important thing here, but it does, right? It is able to get inside of and almost possess Padan Fain, right? So it can't be just a physical thing, right? It merged with him, so it does have ghost-like qualities in that sense. The way we look at possession.
Do you know what, Matt?
Yeah.
I think Matt's connection is the best possible one we could use in terms of a metaphor. It's a disease.
So yeah, and I think let's get to that. I think we're on our way there because we're going to break it down. I know Linda doesn't necessarily like that, but I like the aspect of, if this makes sense, that is a portion of it. In other words, if you think about man-made, it does suggest that this thing was an amalgamation already of things. In other words, it wasn't just a thing. It was already a number of things put together and created. And so one of them, I think, has maybe properties that are of diseases in the sense of a virus, as far as being able to infect, if you will, the physical body and the soul, right? We know it consumes souls. So we have to take that into account. So let's go to the next. I think we have one more fact about Mordeth.
But wait, Mordeth consumes souls, Matt.
Yes.
So does it do that because he did it?
But where did he get the ability to do it, right? It's the thing that gave him the powers, which is the same thing that's giving Fain the powers, right? Mordeth was just a dude, right? He was just a guy looking into stuff. It's what he became infected by.
Started as a guy.
Well, yeah, exactly. He became it. It's a misnomer here, right? We don't have a name for this evil. We just have Mordeth, who was this guy, and then he was infected by something, which we just say this evil that infected him. So I should say, the evil that is the infection, to me, is the man-made amalgamation of lots of things, right? It was something that was, I think it's engineered. That's how when I think of man-made, I would say engineered to be something. So, but let's go on to, let's move this last one about Mordeth. And this is an important one. This is directly from the books, right? This is Agenor. He said, "He guided us. The hand that pointed to Matt was old and shriveled to scarcely human, lacking a fingernail and with knuckles gnarled like knots in a piece of rope. Matt took a step back, eyes widening. An old thing, an old friend, an old enemy, but he is not the one we seek. An old thing, an old friend, an old enemy." Todd, what does that make you think? So everything we've had so far, what is that? An old thing, an old friend, an old enemy, man-made, infection like evil that's not corporeal, right? It's not real, but it's not an illusion. What is sorry, and you were going to say something before, and feel free to say that, but does this lead you down the road towards any kind of notion of what this is?
See, I've always thought of it as a possession kind of thing, that maybe Mordeth could be exorcised from Padan Fain, but now that I'm seeing stuff that I haven't seen before, I'm kind of wondering if that's a good way to look at it. Like this quote here, that kind of
I think
makes you wonder.
Yeah, an old thing, an old friend, an old enemy.
Right.
This is from someone. Now, I had a Twitter conversation, and they tied Agenor's awareness of this evil to the fact that he was watching things from close to the edge of the bore and aware of it. But I tie this absolutely back to when Agenor was in the Age of Legends and his research. I mean, his research as a biologist just makes this an obvious. He calls it an old thing, and then an old friend and an old enemy. In other words, maybe something that he tried to engineer himself, or he saw was engineered, but an old enemy suggests that, maybe it was something he couldn't control, and then it recognized that it would actually infect the Dark Ones too. The Dark Ones people too. Does that make sense? In other words, it was a friend because he could use it to corrupt people, but it was an enemy because it would corrupt him and his people too.
And what bothers me about that quote, and what I'm trying to still understand, is that Fain is new. Mordeth Fain, that he's new, and basically outside the pattern. So,
okay, so yeah, you're leading us right down that road. Okay, so this is a perfect transition. Let's jump into that. What is this amalgamation of Padan Fain and Mordeth? Let's see the first quote on Padan Fain. So yeah, and you brought this up. The question was given to Robert Jordan: has the Padan Fain Mordeth character been present in previous ages, or is he unique to this particular age? Robert Jordan said he is unique to this particular age, a very unique fellow indeed. In some ways, you might say he has unwittingly sidestepped the pattern. Okay, so if we go back to what we started at in the show, he's unique to this particular age. Let's say there's been an infinite number of turnings, and Robert Jordan's telling us that this particular amalgamation of Padan Fain and Mordeth is unique in this moment, which is quite remarkable for what he's, for the system that he's set up. And my son's always asking me, even though he's never read the books, he's always like, okay, you tell me about the circular time thing. You tell me that it's just a repeat. What's interesting about this turning? What's interesting about this story? And I think this is one of these pieces that Jordan's added into what's interesting about this age, because Padan Fain Mordeth is unique, and he unwittingly sidesteps the pattern. Okay, so I know that's totally open to speculation here. I'd like to see what people in chat are saying. When you find out Jordan says he unwittingly sidestepped the pattern, do you think it's literal, metaphorical? What do you think that means? And maybe, Todd, if you have something on the tip of your tongue there, what do you think sidesteps the pattern means? What is Jordan trying to say?
The only part of that I have a problem with is unwittingly, because what if that's the evil that Mordeth figured out, was how to sidestep the pattern?
Yeah, exactly. What if there was a way to sidestep the pattern? I think that's
it's accidental. I think it was accidental.
Yeah,
that he didn't mean to, but it happened. And I think that the old friend part is that evil is unscrupulous, but if you go too far into trying to fight evil, that you become unscrupulous, you're going to meet it around the back, if you like, come full circle, and that had happened before. You could say that we'd seen that in our own age, even in politics, where you just become so against the other person that you actually almost become like them. And that's from Jordan's really solid founding in Taoism that he has in the books, where the more extreme you go on some criterion, the more likely it is to flip to its complete opposite. And I think that's kind of what Agenor was referring to, the fact that they've met that sort of unscrupulousness before, the hatred of them so much that they actually become like them. And so that's not new. But the fact that this is a new mutation, if you like, or new combination, that's the uniqueness. But not that there was the actual elements that he combined isn't new or unique, and Agenor recognized them.
Yeah, I think like that idea of what it became accidental, I think is right. I don't think that this evil is sentient in the sense of what infected him. I don't think has this notion of self. I think that comes in later. I think that what Jordan is showing us here is that this accidental, in other words, the wheel can't account for everything that's going to happen. And that is part of why it needs mechanisms to protect itself. And it hadn't ever seen this, right? We know Padan Fain was changed by the shadow. He was distilled, he was, Moraine speaks about this, what happened to him. And then he was infected by this thing that might have capabilities that with the two mixed together make it so they can sidestep the pattern. And one of our users in chat brought this up, it sounds very Ta'veren-like. And I think that there's something to be said for that. I think we have to go down that road a little bit with this, which is, Ta'veren can be tightly controlled by the wheel, but then they can pull the pattern along with them without the wheels, right? Like Rand can make a decision and the wheel and the pattern the pattern gets pulled along to that decision, and versus the wheel kind of forcing him down a pathway, which is possible too. I like this idea that that possibly what this infection has become within Padan Fain is a loosening of the control that the wheel has over his thread. Do you think, Tal, that he's saying that there isn't a thread here in the pattern, and somehow Padan Fain exists without a thread? Or do you think that a thread exists there, but it doesn't have control over Padan Fain?
Sorry, I was muted.
No problem.
I think in the current metaphysical framework that we've been given for this particular universe, there's no such thing as a person without a thread.
Yeah,
and there's no
exactly.
such thing as you have to have a thread if you're part of the pattern.
Well, okay. So yeah, there's I only parse that so there's two pieces here, right? We do know that inanimate objects do have threads in the pattern. Before, when we used to talk about it, it was just like the soul and the body together are the thread. Greyman is a kind of a weird caveat there, right? But we don't need to go down that road. But I love this idea.
I feel like I'm the wrong panelist.
I think this idea of he has to have a thread to be here, I think you're right. And so being able to sidestep it, I saw Joe and Porthos, they're talking about anti-Ta'veren, this opposites thing. We have Ta'veren. What would the anti-Ta'veren look like? Just like what you brought up, Linda, this idea of opposites that Jordan brings in.
Going too far.
Yeah, could it be this, this anti-Ta'veren where it, in other words, when you do things, instead of pulling all the threads with you, I don't know what the opposite of that would be. In other words, you can do things that the pattern. I'm not sure how I would flip the opposite on that. But yes, I like the concept of an anti-Ta'veren. I had never thought about it that way, but I do like that a lot.
I don't like the term though, because it implies that he has, like, his actions will unwittingly influence those of others, right? The whole concept of a Ta'veren is that their thread is almost magnetic. And that regardless of their actions, they themselves are influencing the actions of others. That's not what Mordeth or Fain do, but
yeah, I know what you're saying. It doesn't. I'm trying to think, and maybe Joe and Porthos can throw out an idea of how they would translate that anti-Ta'veren. And Sarah's in chat. Hey, Sarah, how you doing?
I hope nobody's screenshotting my thinking faces because this one's throwing me.
No, this is, by the way, this is meant to be a deep dive, right? Like the expectation isn't that you're gonna answer all these questions. So let's go on to the next. I think we have another fact here about Padan Fain and Mordeth. Let's read that one. Brandon Sanderson, this is a paraphrased answer. He said, Padan Fain will be seen again. He's a mixture of two things. Mordeth's power, which he got by seeking out all the evil things that were related to the Shadow and the Dark One's Hound. And the Dark One's Hound. Brandon said that Fain's number one goal is to kill Rand, and a close second is to kill the Dark One. Now that Shadar Logoth has been destroyed, all of the Mordeth power that remains in the world is in Fain. So this is an important piece. And the reason why I bring this up is that we have... Oh, sorry. I'll read this next piece too, because this goes to the root of purpose. And this is from Shaisam in A Memory of Light. He says, so nice of his old enemy to welcome him so. His physical form laughed at the heart of the creeping mists, while his mind, the mists themselves, gloried in how perfect everything was. This place would become his, but only after he feasted upon Rand al'Thor, the strongest soul of them all. What a wonderful celebration. So the reason I brought both these quotes in has to do with purpose. What's the goal behind this entity that is Padan Fain and Mordeth now, as it's gotten further along in the series? Before it was like just blatant, maybe revenge, and now it's turned into revenge plus. In other words, he feels some desire to take over Shadowgall, to replace the Dark One, kill the Dark One, if you will. There is this notion, and maybe that stems from Padan Fain. In other words, I think that this evil can be said as taking upon itself kind of a notion of self from the souls that it's actually absorbed. And in this case, right, it took a lot of its notion of self from when it became part of Mordeth. And now it's taking a lot of its notion of itself when it became Padan Fain. In other words, Padan Fain's goals kind of became part of its own. Padan Fain wanted to get back at the Dark One for what was done to him. And so this makes sense as its cadence of what it's doing in the series. A lot of people were like, Robert Jordan kind of didn't know what he was doing with his character after 4 books, and I absolutely disagree with that notion. Do we have one more fact on Padan Fain? I can't remember if that was it. Okay. So that's kind of the core root of all of this. When it comes down now, Linda, to all the things we've talked about, and we look at the end of A Memory of Light. So this is the moment I wanted to share my theory of what I think is happening there. So for any of you that are watching, I don't think we've spoiled too much of the books yet, but there will certainly be spoilers. I didn't warn you about them, and this will spoil this kind of piece of the book for you. So stop watching now or stop listening if you don't want to know this. But we see what we think, and a lot of readers and Twitter time, I've seen this. We think that he has this is the end of Padan Fain and Mordeth. But to me, if you think about the cadence of this thing being kind of a virus-like infection, my theory is that what we see at the very end of the books is actually this evil becoming embedded in Shadowgall and will actually take over Shadowgall in the Fourth Age. And that's what I think is going to happen. If you look at the books, it says that so Matt obviously kills Padan Fain. And in the Companion, it said Matt killed both, and meaning Padan Fain and the Mist. But it doesn't talk about the seed, which is what Shaisam talks about, that he's 3 things. And that seed that he talks about is the dagger. And what we see happen at the very end is Padan Fain, it says, Padan Fain looked like a bundle of sticks and moss, the flesh slipping from his bones. The blackness of the dagger had spread across his rotting skin, and it stank. And behind the dagger, Ruby and all melted away into the mess that had been Padan Fain. To me, that's an absolute clue that this dagger and this evil had found its home and dissipated, which happens, right? We talk about this evil not being a real, but it's not an illusion. It's somewhere in between. I think what happened is we just saw that it embedded itself in Shadowgall and will become, in essence, it will corrupt it and become a problem in the Fourth Age. So that is my theory. What say you, Linda, to that idea?
I actually saw that as the final end of that of the threat of Mordeth and Shaisam and Padan Fain, whatever you want to call that unholy trinity of corruption. I saw that as gone. I didn't see that as living on at all.
Yeah, if let's say that did happen, would you think does that bring back more meaning to the storyline, or do you still hate the way that it ends?
I think that Shaisam was underused. I don't know if I doubt they really knew what Jordan had in mind for him.
Yeah.
So was this, anything like what was supposed to happen?
And that's a good question. I think Jordan answered a little. Well, I should say Brandon answered that, which is he didn't really have a ton of guidance. I think the one thing that Brandon said was not Gollum, right? He was not supposed to end him.
But in his efforts to not Gollum, he basically, in a way, he minimized the entire role of Fain in some ways, where he made him far more viral maybe a viral soul sickness, if you like.
Yeah, he did. He probably added a little bit more there, but I think the roots of it were
Yeah.
still there. But yeah, he did. But you brought
And
up. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that, I mean, Matt's looking at all this filth, and the dagger at that, just before the dagger fell apart or just, melted away, he was actually tempted still by the dagger, even at that point, lying in a heap of filth. He thought how nice the ruby looked and everything, and then it melted. See, and that was Jordan's idea of evil, that it was always a temptation. And Matt wasn't a superhero and immune to temptation. In fact, absolutely the reverse. He was very human and very susceptible to greed in particular, and also to his fear of the one power. And this is why he was so attracted to and by Mordeth, because his actual fear of channeling, I think, was where he started. That and his lust for wealth. They were his real weaknesses. Fear on one hand and lust on the other.
Yeah, and Matt walks away before it melts, and I think that's an important piece, which is he doesn't see that that's what happens to it. What's interesting to me is he walks away from it knowing how dangerous it is. Like, how did you leave? Like that's the part that bothers me. Like, walks away and he's like, what?
"Oh, I think he didn't dare remain in."
Yeah, he didn't want to touch it, but you think maybe he would
because
like,
he knew it'd grab him all over again.
Yeah. I guess, but just knowing somebody else could have picked it up, right? Is a
well.
But it doesn't. It doesn't. It kind of melts in. But that melting in again, when you think about the corruption of Shadar Logoth and such, to me is it. This thing has capabilities that we don't understand, and the idea that it kind of melted and became part of this, to me, it makes it ends the books in a way that I really like. To the people, Super Awesomosity said Matt is the seed. The way I read it is the dagger is the seed. It's the dagger that was taken out, and the dagger is the seed that I can't remember. Shaisam is actually speaking of. Todd, was there anything when everything we've said now? I know I threw it out to you guys to bring a theory along with you. Did you end up bringing one, Todd? Did you have one that you want to share?
Yeah, some guy named Tamerlane made it up.
Tamerlane made it up? Okay, well, how did that go? Was it any different than what I just said?
Yeah. You probably will be able to help me along with it. It's that Fain corrupted Egwene when they were in Faldara, and she carried that corruption throughout the books. And even though at the time that it was written, I don't think the books did. I don't remember where we are. Winter's Heart, I think, is where we were at in the books. I still felt like that was something that there was a pretty good theory that she did carry some of that corruption with her, even though maybe it didn't influence her evilly. It still caused her to want to push harder to get the shadow gone, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's been kind of proven out to be true. I think in comments that Brandon's made, and I think even that Robert Jordan made about this topic, which is that he was able to corrupt them. And Brandon talks about this as almost enhancing someone's natural tendencies. So if you're paranoid, it will amp up your paranoia. If you're hating on somebody, it will amp that up. So I think with Egwene, you could actually say, with some, there would be a theory, but you could say that her mistrust of Rand and what he was about to do was amplified by her interactions with Fain. And you could say that led to kind of a breaking of that relationship. And I don't want to do this, but it could explain the annoyance of how little they spoke throughout the entire book. I was like, can't these people just get together and chat? But it could lead to that. Alida is the same thing, right? It kind of amped up this, and I think we've actually been told that by Brandon, that she was influenced by Padan Fain. And so I think that's very much, again, he's part of this age. He's unique to this particular age. And so I don't think that we should ignore the fact that Jordan had this kind of thread throughout the entire books where he influenced a lot of what happened in this age. and changed it probably significantly from the prior version of this. The last Third Age.
I think it was more Mordeth than Fain, because Mordeth was the great orator and had the ears of powerful people, and I think that he's the one who was able to carry that, especially with Elida. To influence her.
Sorry, just Elida never would have could have. Fain was the legs that Mordeth needed to influence the rest of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry, I know when I say Fain, anytime I say Fain after the Eye of the World or up until the end, it's really Mordeth and the amalgamation that they became, that power behind him, I think is an important one. So another theory that I had, which was kind of fun, has to do with Agenor. When he says old friend, old enemy, Shaisam actually looks at Matt and says that's an old friend. So I think it's an interesting, so the theory would go that Agenor was once infected by this evil in the same way that Matt was. And that's maybe how he came to know it and was aware of it.
I think recognizes like.
Yeah, it's possible.
I think it's more
absolutely.
that. Because, how could the Dark One ever trust Agenor again if he was infected with something that was antithetical to the Dark One?
In the same way that you could, and whether or not he was actually infected versus he, held to something for a short period of time. In other words, I think it leads towards the theory of saying that Agenor did at some level research this particular entity, if you will, and knew about it. In my mind, just as you think back about the Age of Legends, with the apocalypse that happens, this thing was being studied very carefully by Agenor or by people like him, and then whatever, society broke down and it eventually got loose into the world. That's what I kind of like, that piece of the idea itself. By the way,
of course you do.
Of course I do, right? By the way, we're gonna open the phone lines up for those of you that want to call in. If you have a theory about Fain, Mordeth, if something that we said to you tonight so far, changed how you view him in the series. Whatever it is, give us a call. It's 1-313-825-5968. That's 1-313-825-5968. If you just want to call and chat for a second with us, you can do that too. But this, I'd love to hear your ideas about Padan Fain. I agree when it comes to, John, what you're saying. The Dark One really doesn't care whether or not it opposes him so long as it does his bidding. And that's probably true. The Dark One isn't afraid of this evil. And so I don't know that I necessarily would think that Agenor being infected by it potentially would necessarily change him in the Dark One's mind. It might just make him more interesting. I don't know. But I don't know that that's true. Another theory that I had along these lines was that Agenor experimented on a Finn. So what I mean by that is we see the Finns related to this kind of soul, sucking memories out of them and power from them. And we also see this, so the idea being, what if there was research done? What if, because we know that Mordeth went to the Finns, maybe they gave him this particular evil that was man-made, that they had traded with someone else that had come to their realm and given him something. So I think there's a lot of fun you can have there with that concept of how are the Finns tied to this, and are they? Because Brandon does give us that piece that they are one of the things he looked into. Whether or not they were the access, they were the providers of this object or evil to Mordeth. What if it was the dagger that they got from the Finns? That's what I'm saying. Is like what Mordeth went looking. Maybe Mordeth asked for some power, and they handed him, like, how the Finns are, right? It's not like they were like, "Oh, you want power," and they handed him a dagger. And he's like, what is a dagger going to do to me?
No way. And, if you go back, no way. If you go back to the Eye of the World and the description of the room, it was like it was a literal needle in a golden haystack.
Yeah, but again, being influenced by him and Matt being close to Mordeth and potentially being influenced by him. Again, I'm just saying, it's a possibility. There's a resonance that I think Jordan likes by, tying those kind of pieces together. We like to think of them as casual, accidents, but Jordan potentially wrote it that way on purpose. So again, I'm not saying it's like I don't have a lot of facts to back it up. That, Sal. I'm just throwing a fun idea out there. Let's let's bring Andrew into the call here. 1 second. Hey, Andrew, welcome to the Dusty Wheel. How you doing tonight?
Hi, pretty good. Yourself?
Good. So, Padan Fain, is he one of your favorites? Did we convince you that he should be one of your favorites? What do you have? What's on your mind?
No, not necessarily. It's just an interesting topic. More interesting in the context of, I also wanted to see how the interplay between Mordeth and Shadar. Because I think you got to need to talk into that about it.
Yeah, so Shadar, as far as I understand, Shadar comes about after everyone has already died in Eredal, and becomes Shadar Logoth. And Shadar, to me, so the way I interpret it is this corruption is decaying everything that it corrupts, and that decay, that it's kind of in essence it's breaking down maybe the thread, and in some way kind of.
I think Shadar is a result of Mordeth as part of the evil that he found, and I think that's a key and central component of what and who he is.
Yeah.
Mordeth is just enough of a, has just enough of his humanity, if you can call it that, to be cognizant, to try to trick people, aka Matt and the boys, to try to get him out, which is what Matt ultimately does, and frees him. He doesn't realize that Fain's coming in, and you have that, because that's just a whole nother ball of wax. That's different. I mean, if you hadn't had Fain and just had the evil that was tied to the dagger and someone else picked up the dagger, that same evil would have grown. It grew extra powers because Fain had the taint of the Dark One in him.
My only comment to that would
be that made him that much more powerful.
It very well could be that the mists were, in other words, that Shadar was the original incarnation of this, whatever, this man-made evil. In other words, the way that it was passed along. I would say this, the dagger isn't the mists, but it still carried it with him. So there has to be some lesser version of itself that it can embed in things. Or, I guess you could say that it, can change form and corrupt the dagger itself, Yeah,
I think that's what Maureen was saying when she said, even a pebble, I think it was her or Swan that said that, even a pebble getting out of that city could be deadly.
Yeah, exactly. So,
I think it's just so
that whole concept of it's not a real thing, but it's not an illusion. It clearly suggests that it can change form. And I think that's an important acknowledgement here, which is this thing it's not one form, right? Whatever Mordeth was, it wasn't a physical body, right? It was something that could corrupt even a rock. When you think about that, like, how does this thing corrupt a rock?
I mean, in that sense but that tends to mean that it fused in or morphed into. If it had a soul, it embedded itself within the object, not that the object became the thing. I think that the object is nothing more than the vessel. Sort of like if you're thinking of a genie in a lamp, the dagger is the lamp. The genie comes out and does whatever he does, and it's just housed in there.
Yeah. No,
I mean,
and I can see that from maybe a topical perspective, that it's just on top of it's carried with, but it's not something that can be cleaned off, right? I'm trying to get really technical here, but like what this thing actually is. But I do like that idea. When it comes to, sorry, go ahead. You were gonna say. Oh, sorry, that was Tal. Welcome back, Tal.
Where have I been?
Oh, sorry, I thought that Todd, maybe it was Todd that dropped. We lost Todd.
It was Todd that got kicked off.
Yeah.
We do have a question, and I'll pose this to everybody, including Andrew here.
All right, well,
do you
thank
think
you very much.
Beth?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Beth said, "Do you think Fain and Mordeth would have been as dangerous if they had not combined with Mosh and Shin, or did Shadar subsume Mosh and Shin?" This is a good question. Do you think, Andrew, that there was any accentuation of Fain or Fain Mordeth when it interacted with Mosh and Shin, or do you think the Black Wind was just kind of it stayed to its side, and as far as they didn't infect each other, or do you think there was some combination that went on there?
Well, I think what it was I think that Mordeth / Fain, whatever we want to call him, when it encountered Black Wind, I think it sort of left an imprint and left sort of commands of the Black Wind and said sort of, hey, it's sort of, if the Black Wind had any sentience, it sort of brought that sentience to the front and said, hey, do this and do my bidding, rather than just purely an instrument of wind or a force of nature.
Yeah.
In some ways,
Yeah, absolutely.
It almost in some ways like with Brandon and the way the Spren, sort of, once they bond somebody, they just get more sentient.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that idea, that bringing the Spren in. By the way, thank you again for calling. Really appreciate you sharing your ideas there, and really appreciate you being a viewer, man. Hey, we'll talk to you soon. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.
So, Linda, what do you have there? Do you think that there was an interaction there between Mashadar, in essence, or Mordeth, whatever the evil is, and Mashin Shin? Do you think either one influenced the other?
Well, Jordan actually answered a question on that. He just said that there was professional courtesy between the two, which is interesting way of describing it. So no, on the whole,
it did seem to be waiting for Rand, though. Like, in other words, it did seem to be maybe professional courtesy in the sense of, you think, it'll do a favor for a friend, Yeah,
that's right. Because it was in its own interest too. It wasn't like it was doing something that it would never have done or never wanted to do.
Yeah.
I think they came to an arrangement in that sense.
Okay. Yeah. No, I like that idea. Let's bring in...
They augmented each other.
They augmented each other is very possible too. There being something that they took, I think that's part of this evil, is that it's kind of like the Borg, right? I think it can consume and, have these things become part of it. That's what seems to be, its ability to morph, and evolve seems kind of integral to this evil.
Wouldn't Shai Sam be like an example of that?
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, I think Shai Sam is this evolution, right? Even if it's evolution of sentience, I think is indicative of that for sure. Let's bring in a first-time caller, Josh, on the show. Hey, Josh, welcome to the Dusty Wheel tonight. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
I'm doing fantastic. Hey, thanks for being a first-time caller. So what's on your mind about Padan Fain tonight?
Okay, so you guys were talking about just how it might be a seed. We know in the books that they did experiments in vacuoles that were outside the pattern. And we know that the Shan Chen, or the people that lived on Shan Chen, brought over monsters before to defeat the Trollocs during their version of the Trolloc Wars.
Sure.
What if the evil that is Shadar Logoth was brought over and then mutated into that world? Yeah. And that's why it's known in the Second Age as a friend and an enemy, because at one point it was used to help defeat the Dark One, but maybe it corrupted the survivors of a different age before the Age of Legends. So
no, I love this theory.
Explain this.
Yeah. No, this is good. I love the idea that this thing could originally have been from a parallel world. Maybe even a perpendicular world, but from a parallel world similar to the Ogier, and that it somehow transferred back with someone that was doing some research and went to one of these worlds and came back, and that from there it has morphed. In other words, it was found and it was manipulated. So maybe at a time it was, I love this idea that it was evolved into something that was used against the shadow, and then it evolved into something that was used for the shadow. I love that. I love that parity between old friend, old enemy, and awareness of it. Yeah, I think that's a valid thing. We hear Jordan say man-made, and so it just depends on if you're saying maybe the root, the base of this thing, and that was then, maybe engineered later on. No, I like that. Tal, what were you going to say?
Oh, just that of course you like it. Like, we know. We know that Mashadar...
Go ahead.
We know that Sorry, I'm just making sure I have my terms correct. We know that Mashadar is a man-made evil. That it is the evil found within the hearts of men. It's not an entity separate from itself until it has a body to attach to, right?
Well, we've never been interpreted man-made, but that is an interpretation. I think you can say that it was engendered out of man's hatred for one another. I certainly think you can say that.
That's right.
Yeah,
which is quite natural.
Yeah,
but
you could
then
say it was engineered.
Say that again, Josh?
Sorry.
No,
You
say it
could
again.
say
I didn't hear
whatever
you.
they brought over from. You could say whatever they brought over from the world, the parallel world, was something different, and then they engineered that seed into something that they could use to defeat the Dark One, or whatever purpose it needed to be used for.
Yep.
And then from there, it just mutated and then infected. And I feel like that would satisfy your man-made thing.
I agree with you, Josh.
I don't think it needs to be that complex.
No, I think.
Nor do I.
I think that's a wonderful theory, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Josh.
It's okay.
By the way, favorite book was Knife of Dreams. Nice. That's your. Before I let you go, favorite Forsaken. I did this last week, and it made me laugh when I heard some answers. So, who's your favorite Forsaken?
My favorite Forsaken. Oh my goodness, that's probably Demon Dread.
Okay. That's respectable.
Did I say that correctly?
Demondred.
Who knows?
Yeah.
There's two different ways.
No, I wish we would have gotten more of him, which we did, but then Jordan changed it, so then we didn't. But anyways, yeah, I think it would have been.
Yeah.
I think he was a great pick for sure. Hey, by the way, thank you so much for calling in to the show. Really appreciate you being a first time caller, and hopefully you'll watch next week.
Guys.
Hey, thanks, man. Hey, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Talk to you soon.
So this is a question Joe Perry had in chat. He said, is that evolution the reason for all the name changes for Fain, Mordeth, Geral, Mordeth, Shaisam? I think so. I think it's growing awareness of, and I think it's probably somehow affected by what it infects. So that the evolution of how it considers itself, I think, is part of this evolution. And that's why I like the theory that Josh posed there, which is I don't think it's just one thing, right? I think it has evolved from wherever it came from. So what we see in Shadar was probably an evolution from something that came before it. And what we see it doing under Shaisam was probably, continuing that evolution of what it's capable of. But certainly this mist concept does seem to be fundamental to it, for sure.
But could we compare it to, again, a living organism, and this is just sort of like it's a change from pupa to larva to
yeah. We certainly can, absolutely, and maybe it does have an end point of what's happening, this evolution. Maybe it's not just kind of willy-nilly. Maybe there is something more, and again, that kind of fits into what I think happened at the end of A Memory of Light. So I like your idea, Tal. I'll evolve that idea into my own theory, which is it's going to morph.
Yeah, you can have it. I don't like Fain.
Let me bring Derek in, who's another first-time caller. Hey, Derek, welcome to the Wheel of Time. That's awesome. Welcome to the Dusty Wheel. How you doing tonight?
Good. How are you?
Good. So when it comes to Padan Fain and Mordeth and what we've been talking about tonight, where are you at? What were your thoughts?
I'm kind of going back with that. It might be something left over from the first age, like some sort of technological virus, that might, Matrix style, feed on people. And it's just something that's been sitting around for a long time.
Yeah, I absolutely believe there's no reason it could not be a leftover from the first age. Nothing says that this thing has to come from the Age of Legends. The only piece that I say is I think it goes back as far as the Age of Legends because of Agonor's comment, but I know that other people interpret Agonor's comment differently. But I like the idea that it's a first age element, if you will, something from it.
I think that, kind of going along with it being able to inspect things and like has an ethereal concept, it's similar to like the, lurks or Mydral's Fade, whatever you want to call them, weird abilities to become ethereal and, move in ways that they don't really understand.
Yeah, absolutely. It actually it almost has it resonates with our golem or Golem, I don't know however you pronounce it, the way that they can morph their own bodies, right? And Agenor was instrumental in that. In other words, this ability to not have a single form and be able to change form into the mist when necessary, but maybe not. Again, and something that someone brought this up on Twitter, this idea that it was kind of more magic-like than we think of the one power, right? Or more kind of traditional, mystical magic. And I think when Brandon talked about it as the natural, unnatural kind of thing here, and it being man-made, I definitely like this. It doesn't follow this kind of one power rules. There's not this, overarching litany of this is exactly how this works. And Jordan left this one out there as, there's this evil power, and there's many of these things, and it has mists, and it's capable of doing these things that don't have the rules that we're used to, I guess. At least that's how I kind of view this, as separate from something like the one power. Now, when it comes to Padan Fain in the end, I don't know if you heard my theory about A Memory of Light. Did you hate how A Memory of Light ended?
Oh, no, I honestly, I might be one of the few, but I really just thought, Matt getting yoinked by the mist and then just surprise, dealing with him was really funny.
there is a funny aspect to it, and I think Linda doesn't like that aspect. Was that true, Linda? The nature of this kind of being a funny scene, if you will.
No, it was some of his other Shosam's earlier ravings. I thought he was played a bit too much for laughs. I mean, yes, Matt is a trickster, and Brandon wanted to bring him back to his roots, which again tended to mean play him for laughs a little. Yeah. So, but I didn't actually mind that aspect. Yeah. I mean, I wasn't surprised that that's what happened, I guess.
Right. There's not a huge surprise there. So before I let you go, Derek, who's your favorite Forsaken?
I'm gonna have to go with Lanfear.
She's
the crazy ex-girlfriend.
Thank you. That is true.
You're never allowed to call back.
That's a correct answer. You can call back all the time. In fact, you can be a panelist. Great answer, Derek. Hey, man, thanks you so much for being a first-time caller. I really appreciate you sharing your opinion about this. Absolutely agree that the first age theory is very valid in this regard. And hopefully you'll keep on watching and give us a call next time.
Absolutely.
Have a good night.
Bye.
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 Okay, we have one more caller, and then we'll jump into some chat here, and we'll kind of tie up the evening. Lancer is on the line. He's been Lancer. Welcome back to the Dusty Wheel. How you doing tonight?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, Norm.
Exactly. How did I not start it off with Norm? Oh man, I should have done that. Shoot. So what's going on tonight? How have you felt? Did I convince you with any of my random theories about this, or do you have one of your own?
I got two things, and then I'm going to have to disagree with you, okay, Matt, on one of your points. The first point is that I would love to see. I hope that the TV show does more of expanded role for Mordeth, so that we can actually see some more of his backstory on how he developed and became as a character, similar to what they're doing with Logain. So that's my first point. And my second point is that I hope they make his ending a lot better. I mean, don't get me wrong. A Memory of Light is by far my favorite book, but his arc ending was kind of anticlimactic for me. It was just kind of, and it was just done. So I hope they change. If they're going to change anything of a character, I hope they change his ending to be at least somewhat more satisfying, so that this whole big, huge buildup of I got to kill Rand, I got to kill Rand, I got to kill Matt, I got to kill Rand, whatever, doesn't just end on a whimper. So that was my second point. But for my third one, the part that I do disagree with you, Matt, is that Shadar and the whole taint power stuff, they don't mix, because if you remember when Rand got stabbed by Ishmael, that whole wound closing thing, and then when he got stabbed again by Mordeth and the dagger, Nynaeve was trying to heal it, and she was saying that she couldn't heal it because it felt like there was like two different powers going up against the one power. So when you were saying that Mordeth kind of merged into Shia Ghul at the end, that wouldn't fit with me, because if those are two different powers, it's like oil and water, they wouldn't mix. So I don't think that theory holds much water because of that, because those two evils could not mesh together. So that's my one quibble with your your hypothesis.
Let me quibble with your quibble. So
Please.
yeah, no, I think that's the concept that you're saying, which is that those two powers were used against each other. I do agree that the taint was used, and it was an antithesis to what was in Mashadar. That part's true, but what was in Fain wasn't necessarily the taint. The taint was something specific. What actually is the shadow is different than the power of the taint itself. So I would say that's one issue here, and two, I would say that we know that Jordan said that they were an amalgamation, right? So Jordan said that whatever Mordeth was, and it's separate from just Mashadar. Whatever Mordeth was, it was able to make an amalgamation between itself and whatever had been done to Padan Fain. And I would say this, that it somehow was able to use that in order to be able to infect the Dark Ones, the Trollocs, for example, the Myrddraal. It was able to, and it showed at the very end that it found its way past whatever that difference was. And so it wasn't canceling those powers out. We actually saw it be able to usurp those powers. So I would say, yes, the taint, but I would say the end of the books actually demonstrates that it could usurp the power of the shadow and its minions. And so it doesn't negate the idea that it could also usurp eventually the influence it has over Shia Ghul. So that would be my answer to you.
Here's my one counter to that, because maybe then Fain / Mordeth, whatever you want to call him, maybe he was the conduit to make those two powers mesh, because in them as themselves they could not mix, but maybe something about the man itself, pun intended, is the reason why that happened with what happened with the Fades and such. And may I ask one more thing of one of your panelists? Linda, we need you to settle a bet, if you could.
Okay. Maybe.
We're asking on the chat whether or not Elias is still currently a warder, or if he was past tense a warder. So if you could settle that, there's a beer on the line.
Okay. Let's hear it, Linda.
Rima hasn't let him go.
Exactly.
He's still a warder.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. I don't know who won the beer.
I owe you a beer. Guys on chat, I owe you a beer.
Hey, thanks, Lancer, for always calling in, man. Appreciate it. And we'll see you next week, man.
All right, y'all. Take care.
Have a good one. Bye-bye. Bye. That's awesome. I love that you were used there to win someone a beer. Nicely done, Linda. So, by the way, thanks again for all of the individuals who called in and hopefully enjoyed our little deep dive into Padan Fain. Is there anything here, Linda, that you want to make mention of that we didn't kind of cover when it comes to Padan Fain, Mordeth, this whole conversation we've had? I don't want to exclude. I know we've done all this kind of theorizing. Is there something that you wanted to kind of bring, kind of to the conversation?
I actually have some theorizing.
Yeah, let's hear it.
I'm not sure that by the end of the book whether the pattern it could be looked on that the pattern had actually figured out how to use Fain in the end. I think that we had Rand was thinking of the Dark One. Lanfear was thinking of killing the Dark One. Maybe Shaisam was being held in reserve by the pattern to replace the Dark One if one of those two full characters actually did the deed, and to stop everything falling apart.
I love that, like a failsafe.
Yes, indeed. And once it was obvious that neither of them were going to be able to kill the Dark One, Matt promptly dispatched him.
Yeah.
I kind of love it.
Yeah.
Linda, it speaks right. It goes straight to the AI theory in the first place of the pattern in the AI.
Yep.
Because it does act like a failsafe. I love it.
That's
on board.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, it goes back to that idea that it throws 3 dragons up, and 2 of them are going to be false dragons, and one's going to be a true dragon. Maybe there was some ability here, like you said, where the wheel ends up using this amalgamation, this oddity, and it was available to it as long as it perceived that it was under threat from the Dark One. Yeah. And that could be, you could make a case that this age was different from all others because this one was a lot closer, right? Yeah. This one's a lot closer. The Dark One almost took this age. And so it had to kind of, like you said, come up with a couple different variations to use as potential solutions if Rand failed. I love that's. Yeah, I think failsafe is a totally valid theory. Yeah, thanks for sharing that one.
Thank you.
Definitive. Nailed it.
I like it. I like
Thank
it.
you very much.
To black. We're done.
Todd or Tal, do you have any theories you want to share with us before we end the night?
No. Nothing better than that.
I have a question because I've talked to a few people about this. Would you read a Shadar Logoth Mordeth type outrigger?
Oh gosh.
Who wouldn't?
Yes.
A show about this character who goes kind of Indiana Jones like, and
I have a bone to pick with you, Matt. I really don't love the Indiana Jones allegory.
How is this not Agenor plus Indiana Jones? I don't understand.
It's Agenor and Belloc, if anything.
Look, you just imagine the adventures this guy went through. He ended up with the Finns. This guy was going everywhere. He had to have, just think of the Constitution. He must have, this dude had to be fearless.
Belloc. He was a fighting archaeologist. He just wasn't a good guy.
I see.
He's a good guy.
Yeah. I'm just talking about just the fearlessness of being able to go anywhere to actually get the thing he's looking for, and doing really stupid stuff and crossing stupid lines and risking his life. All for because look, let's see, he was a good guy at first, right? He was trying to, and I think it's more along the Indiana Jones. He was a good guy. He wanted to destroy the Shadow because of what was happening. He just ended up, becoming infected by this thing that actually.
Did he have a hat?
Did he have a hat? I think he should have a hat. And that's how it was drawn. And I would
love a whip.
I would at least a whip. So. Is there anyone else? Sorry if I didn't miss your comment in chat. Hopefully you enjoyed this absurdly fun, at least for me, deep dive into all of these, kind of how the wheel works and how Padan Fain and Mordeth are part of this. As always, to my panelists, really appreciate you showing up. Linda, appreciate you being with us on Thursday, on our Wednesday.
Thank you. I've loved it. Loved chatting with everyone here.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun having you talk about this topic, and thanks for everyone. We tried this live theory discussion. I'm looking to find out if you liked what we did here, if you want us to keep on trying this every once in a while, throw a topic out and break it down. Next time I'll come without so much excitement for my own theories. But I wanted to try this with something that I just felt really excited about. So
TBD, buddy.
In other words, the next time we do this, it's going to be about land fear. So to you three, thank you for being with us. To everyone that watched us, really appreciate you. And say hi to everyone there. Thanks, Sarah, for joining in on the conversation and chat. And to everyone else, good night. And as we say around here, smash to black.